I'm very excited about this next panel, and I hope it's very interactive because we have a great topic, and that's the role of technology and innovation in helping us move out of the recession. And I suspect that a lot of people in this room, along with the great panel that we've assembled, will have some, I hope, concrete ideas that will allow, as Josh said in the previous panel, he's hoping to continue to draw a paycheck. I hope that some of these ideas will enable us all to continue to draw paychecks. To help us discuss the issue of technology and helping us emerge from the economic gloom, we have Chen, who is CEO of Sybase, Brad Johnson, who is a partner at McKinsey Company, and Bill Gross, who is founder of both Idealab and eSolar. Please welcome Chen, Brad Johnson, and Bill Gross.
How are you?
Very good.
Hey.
Great. So while everyone gets seated and comfortable, I want to start off the panel by mentioning a very provocative story that my colleague Jesse Hempel wrote for Fortune magazine a couple of months ago that posited that unlike the 1970s, when the semiconductor industry helped pull the United States out of recession, and the 80s when we had PCs pull the country out of recession, and the 90s when we had the internet, that in today's economic environment, there is no big idea that is the equivalent of the semiconductor, the PC, or the internet. Chen, true or false?
Well, obviously, I can't agree with that. You know, there are many ideas. I mean, yesterday we talked a lot about mobility. Today we talk about mobility. I think the mobile commerce world, arguably, is going to be bigger than the e-world that we know. There's a lot of innovation in green tech. There's a lot of innovations going on with biotech. So I beg to differ in that. You're like esteemed colleague.
Bill Gross, you're involved in some of those areas. Your company, eSolar, for example, is in one of these potential big ideas. What do you see as the environment today being for innovation, and will clean tech or mobility be a driver of getting the U.S. out of the current economic gloom?
Oh, well, I definitely think so. I think we're actually entering a second industrial revolution. For 10,000 years, man used his muscle power to provide for himself, and then for 200 years, we learned how to burn things. And this century, we're going to learn how to take renewable resources and make all the energy of the planet. That is a multi-trillion-dollar opportunity. It's just being invested in right now. Just the infrastructure is being put in place for that. But we're going to have to power the planet this way this century, and it's an enormous opportunity.
Brad, at McKinsey, you guys have done a lot of research about the environment that we're in, but also the role of innovation in helping not only the US, but the global economy get out of past recessions. Can you share any insights from McKinsey's research and work that gets at the role of innovation in helping recover?
Yeah, it's interesting. Tech plays a huge role in economic growth and economic development, and that's happened through all the areas you described, with semiconductors, with the PC, with the internet. Tech has really been a driving force. What's interesting is we did in the late 90s, well, in the late 90s, labor productivity growth in the States really, really accelerated from an average of about 1% labor productivity growth a year to almost 3 times that. It was a little under 3%. And the work we did tried to figure out, what was actually causing that. Was it technology directly substituting for labor? Was it fundamentally allowing people to do totally different things? That happened in some cases. So there were some cases where technology created economic growth. An example is wireless spectrum. The auction of wireless spectrum and innovations there, that was new output. That created economic growth. But the vast bulk of the productivity growth and the vast bulk of the impact that technology has is by enabling managerial innovation, not directly by the technology itself. And so these can be really banal things like Walmart, for example, uses a very sophisticated POS system and a back office system called Retail Link to think very carefully about how to co-locate products. And the example I like is around Halloween time, they co-locate batteries with the Halloween costumes because they know those are purchases that people tend to make at the same time. And there are lots and lots of examples of technology enabling people to do different things which I would call an indirect benefit as opposed to, a direct benefit of a real substitution of capital for labor.
Let's step back for just 1 minute, and I think we have a spot me opportunity here. I wanted to sort of take a temperature of the audience and get a sense of how people feel about the economy today. And here's the question. When do you think the global economy will start to recover? And if you think it's 2010, it's 1, 2011, 2, 2012, 3, already recovering 4, and I guess if you don't think it's going to recover by 2012, then we're all in big trouble. Takes about 10 seconds, so please go ahead and log your votes, and let's see how optimistic or pessimistic our audience is. I guess it's gonna, okay, go ahead and vote. Okay, the vote is closed.
Oh, wow.
So I'd say that looks like half the room kind of feels like we're there, and about half the room feels like 2 years out, year and a half out.
This is
this consistent, Brad, with what your research is showing when you talk to CEOs?
It is. We do a survey of just over 1,500 executives monthly now about, and this is one of the questions. It's consistent in the sense that we laid out 4 scenarios, and the one that people think is most likely to happen, the executives we surveyed, is called battered but resilient, which means that the resilient part refers to the fundamental health of credit markets, of trade flows, et cetera. People think, on balance, that is resilient, i.e. stable. And the battered part obviously relates to a pretty severe economic downturn. But here the number was 43% see recovery in 2010. In our survey, it's 40% of the respondents view the economy as battered but resilient. The thing I would add, and that aligns with this 2010 figure for starting to recover, the thing I'd add, though, is as another part of that scenario, starting to recover and actually recovering, there can be a very, very long time frame between those 2 events. So in our battered but resilient scenario, we don't get back to trend GDP growth until 2012 or maybe even a bit later.
Right. John, let me ask you a little bit about managing in this current environment, because even though you as a leader are optimistic, you got to have a lot of people in your employee workforce who are really worried. I mean, this is an entire environment where people are afraid to take risks because they're worried about losing a paycheck. How do you inspire and motivate your employees to continue to innovate and do the things that you need to do to be prepared for the economy post-recession at a time when people are just naturally risk-averse in their personal as well as their professional lives?
Well, I'll answer the question. I'd like to comment on, I look at that screen, it reminds me of that.
Well, everybody else can't see that.
Okay. But you just had the bar chart up there, right? About the recovery?
Oh, the recovery. I thought you were asking the question.
It reminds me of the that want to be a millionaire game. and I'm afraid the audience is wrong, but that's okay.
Why you think the audience is wrong about the recovery?
Well, 2010 is way too soon. I guess all you need to do is look at unemployment, which gets to your point. Or you look at the unemployment. I don't know of any jobless recovery that is sustainable. So, but that's neither here or there, and we could debate with economists in the room. It answers your question. You have to you have to keep preaching the fact to the employee base about innovations, and be able to show them that you have the sustainability. And that's how we do it. We are fortunate that we're doing reasonably well as a company. We kind of stick to our core, explain it a lot, explain it quite often, honestly speaking, and resist the temptation of coming up with a new strategy. Because the moment you come up with a new strategy, there will be about 5 zillion unanswered questions, and that's when you really spook the employee base. And the same thing, if you want to spook the Wall Street, that you come up with some uncertainty of something right now, that would really get you going. So I think you stay consistent, you do a lot of communications, and you could show that you indeed could do reasonably well, and that will restore everybody's, or at least keep everybody's confidence.
Bill, you started out by talking about the fact that we're on the cusp of a new revolution. In this environment where people and institutions are risk averse, are you really seeing innovation happening? And talk about that.
Well, we're seeing that almost every resource is scarce. Obviously, money is scarce, everything is scarce. The one thing that actually isn't as scarce, though, is talent, because people are willing to leave their so-called safe company to come work at a startup or an entrepreneurial venture, mainly because that safe company isn't so safe anymore. So you actually can recruit people to companies that have big, hairy, audacious goals more than ever, I think. You know, back in the boom days, you know, you couldn't get people to leave the company they were at. We're finding actually we can get pretty great talent. So if you set out a big goal and you do have the capital to do it, but you use that capital carefully, we've been able to find the great talent.
Brad, you guys consult to very large organizations. What's the, and a lot of people in this audience would argue that large organizations don't do a lot of innovation to begin with, but especially in this environment, are you seeing companies at least, if not do product innovation, work really hard on the process innovation? Is this a time when, you know, partly out of necessity, companies are having to try to experiment with new things and be innovative?
In the, so yes. The short answer. In the last downturn, so 2000 to 2002, we did an analysis of company performance in tech specifically, and half of the leaders in pre-recession were laggers post-recession. And we defined leaders by a couple of metrics. It was return on invested capital, market to book ratio, a few other metrics. So there's a huge awareness, certainly in tech, that of two things, I think. One is that this is a potentially very risky time. And the second is it's also a time of tremendous opportunity. And that's why you hear people talking about things like adopting a through-cycle mindset. You know, Intel is doing significant investment in manufacturing, at new process nodes. There's all sorts of stuff going on by firms who are trying to capture that opportunity. So I think I haven't certainly seen any slowdown of the pace of innovation. And I think, to the point that was just made, I mean, to the extent that that happens, for some firms there will be a capital constraint, and they won't be able to do all the projects they would like to pursue. But in general, people are spending as much on R&D, and some firms are spending more on sales and marketing through the downturn.
I have one thing I would add to that. In a downturn, that's when company market share positions change a lot. When things are good, boom times, they don't change very much. So if you take the top 10 companies in an industry, in a downturn over a 2-year period, 3 or 4 of them might switch. In good times, that doesn't happen. So it really is an opportunity for those who are more aggressive to gain share through innovation and then carry that forward even further when the good times come back.
Right, and Jim Collins, the author of Good to Great, is doing a lot of research right now about this subject of, you know, the great companies like recessions, because it is their chance to pull ahead from the pack. You know, whether we like it or not, this recession has resulted in the strong hand of government playing a larger and larger role in private enterprise. And I want to ask the panelists to talk a little bit about, you know, whether there are any things that the federal government can do to promote innovation. John, let's start with you.
Well, the classical one of R&D tax credit, I think the strong push on getting more talents, both homegrown as well as talents from overseas. We really have to keep our kind of tool set for the innovation and get ready for the next wave, so to speak. I mean, arguably, you know, we are leading the wave now. You know, getting maybe you'll see the result in 3 years or 5 years out, but it's important that we got the talent.
So you maintain that the U.S. is still leading edge on innovation?
The environment in the United States is still leading edge in innovations because of our mindset, because all the great work's been done in the last 30 to 50 years. But that's not deteriorating if you're getting more expensive doing business in the United States. There are more regulations. You know, the markets have too much regulations in it. Talents, you know, we're chasing away immigrants or potential immigrants or foreign students. There are a lot of those factors. Each of them start depleting.
Bill Gross,
Yeah.
if you could write a bill to
well,
help innovation, what would it include?
If you were to try and find a way to deploy capital to help small businesses grow, because most of the job creation comes from smaller businesses, I think there's been net job destruction from the Fortune 500 over the last 10 and 20 years, and huge job creation from small business. I think the number one thing you can do is give some incentive to create jobs. Because you were saying you can't be a jobless recovery, it has to be a job-based recovery. And if you're a venture capitalist trying to figure out how to deploy money, think of all the due diligence you do on a company to try and figure out to make your smart bets, and you're still not right very often. So I don't know how the government's going to figure out what companies to give the money to. But job creation, that's across the board. And if the right incentive can be made to put people in jobs, I think that will make the strongest recovery.
I will reduce tax today in employers that are willing to hire in science and technology, rather than go the other way around.
So let me ask the question another way. Do you think that there are policies in place right now or proposals that are being contemplated right now that would stifle innovation in the United States and drive it to other markets?
Well, for one, what's on the table right now, coupled with how you pay for healthcare, is this whole issue about taxing immediately foreign subsidiary profits. Now, forget about whether it makes sense or otherwise, okay? But it does create a cost-based increase for all the multinational companies all over the world. So you could think through what that means to when we compete with local competitors. You could think through if you're a company that are listed or are headquartered in outside the United States, you have less of that burden. I know there's a lot of debates whether, what our tax rates are, our progressive tax rates are, and the actual tax rates are. But on the books, we have the highest tax rate, the corporate tax rate right now, on profit. Even Japan, who used to be the highest, have now starting to reduce that rate. There are a lot of things that is happening to us, whether it's logical or otherwise, isn't making a lot of sense for innovations and competitors.
We're going to start opening it up for questions and really comments, because as I said at the outset of the panel, I mean, the brain trust in this room is significant, and we want to tap into it. And actually, John McKinley immediately sort of sent in a question that I'd like to put to the panel, which is that students in the U.S. are avoiding hard science degrees, and are there things that can be done to reverse that trend? Does anyone on the panel want to take that? No?
No, first of all, I'm not sure, I'm not doubting, I'm not sure that's a statement that I fully subscribe to. I think everybody, most student knows that, and there may be a lot of statistic behind it. I'm not suggesting it's wrong, I'm just suggesting that I don't know that's a true statement. And from my exposure, people are still going into science and well, at least the CS degrees, because they know that's where the job's going to be.
John?
I didn't know being truthful was part of the requirement here, but I thought this was like the blogosphere. I'll use you one example. Advanced degrees in nuclear engineering in the United States, there's probably 220 students pursuing those in aggregate across some of the major universities. 10 of those are U.S. citizens.
Oh, that's a different issue.
Well, I think if you're talking about a very myopic, what about the United States and competitiveness versus the global recovery? That's a depressing statistic for me.
Yeah, that's a different issue, and that's one reason why I pointed out earlier. Our current immigration policy, or their lack of, in terms of encouraging the student that from a foreign nation that we help train, and allow them to, or encourage them to leave us and go somewhere else, back to the country or somewhere else, where a lot of the people in this room, the venture capitalists, are chasing their talents, and you guys are investing in all kinds of companies around the world, which is probably so. I'll do exactly the same thing. That created a competitive pressure against the United States over time. this is a consequence that we need to, deal with. But I would agree, science and technology, more and more portion of the students, both in undergrads and graduate school in the United States, especially graduate school, are foreigners. And I think the key to then, the answer to that question then is we need to have a immigration policy that actually makes sense for us. And I think Freeman had written a number of things on it. And I mean, there's a lot of think tank that make their recommendations to the government, whether they will follow through or not. Different subject matter.
One more thing might happen is a lot of people have written about how people graduating went into banking because that was where the money was. And now that that has changed, that might change the course of people's college careers to some extent. It's going to take some time for that to work into the system. But I think people will follow the money to some extent.
But Bill, don't you think those are very different personalities? I mean, the kind of person who wants to work for an investment bank, whether the dollars are there or not, is kind of a different person than the man or woman who wants to start a company or be part of an entrepreneurial venture. I mean, well, can you take the one pool of talent and move it to the next?
You would think that, but there are some smart physicists and mathematicians that were hired by quant firms that we're hiring at eSolar because they love clean tech. They always wish they could make a living deploying their skills in that kind of area, and now that's a possibility. In the past, they would have been recruited and lured by someone else.
Yeah, mortgage-backed security analysis is really technically, quantitatively intense. It's a probably timely or untimely example now, but probably the typical deal-making, stereotypical investment banker.
Yeah, that's
different profile, but there are a ton of guys who are doing deep quant stuff. I wanted somebody just to comment. On immigration policy, the thing that's interesting to me is that we're still relatively, I'm not particularly fussed by or bothered by the percentage of advanced degrees that are US citizen versus non-US citizen. What does trouble me is that we're still relatively lenient and accepting of talented people from foreign countries coming here to learn and to share knowledge, but it's getting much, much harder for them to stay here. So we're not really capturing the benefit of that education. So, and I don't have a policy suggestion on it, but that gives me a lot of pause.
Allow me to point one thing out for everybody here in this room. I kind of view all of us on the same side.
No, I'm anti-innovation.
Oh, I see. No, I'm talking about this issue about how you fund or how you add resources or fuel the innovations of with the people. This past year, the H-1B visas, there's a very little noise in the system. We actually, the industry didn't fill the H-1B quota as quickly as we had in the last 5, 6, 7 years. And what does that mean? Well, partly because of the economic issues that we're not hiring that many people to start out with. But the other big part that is kind of underneath, hidden behind it, is people are actually readily going home, India, China, the rest of the world. They don't really want to stay here. See, we gotta change our mindset a little bit. Used to be that this is the place to stay, if we could stay. This is no longer true as days progresses. So we as a nation need to understand that it's no longer that. And so I hope the leaders in Washington could figure that out. There's an issue hidden behind this that people would rather be home because they got opportunity there too.
Right. We had a comment in the back. Is that Dixon? Is that you?
I just wanted to comment on the question that you asked about job creation and venture capital. I just finished up a year as the chairman of the National Venture Capital Association. We did a study that venture capital backed companies are responsible for over 12 million jobs in the economy right now. The revenues associated with those companies corresponds to 20% of the US GDP annually on approximately a 0.2% annual investment. 1 out of 3 Americans has been positively impacted by developments in a life sciences company, and we've funded thousands of new clean tech startups. And so we discovered further that 92% of all the jobs that get created by venture-backed companies happen, not surprisingly, after they go public. So we started a big project that you probably have read about, and I won't go into it now, to try and help get a reasonable flow of IPOs happening in our economy again. If what we need to get done, we need to get the IPOs going again. We need to have some more liquidity. Those are all in the NVCA report. And the final comment I'd make is that we need Washington to not go in and fix something that isn't broken. We do not need to have carried interest taxed as ordinary income. That'll surely screw up the venture industry. And we need to unwind a large number of the provisions that were inadvertently put into place by Spitzer and others and folks at the SEC that make it really, really problematic for our companies to go public. Thanks.
Let me throw it to Bill Gross, because we had been talking about something, I think, earlier, and the idea is that, you know, what's happening now is that the companies that are getting funding, either through angel investors or through other means, they're getting funded at really sort of bare bones minimum levels. And you know, is there a positive unintended consequence that comes out of that? You know, by having to build a company as lean as you possibly can, is there a positive upside to that? That ultimately that company ends up being smarter, stronger, faster, better?
I think it's almost only positive. When you get early on in the DNA of a company to operate with scarce resources and still be successful, that is extremely valuable over the life of the company. In fact, one of the things that we always think about at Idealab, because we've had companies in all different eras, all different sizes, all different amounts of money they've raised, is how do you have a company that raises a lot of money act like it has none and still pretend like it has none? And it's actually impossible. So actually having none is maybe the only way. And we have found companies actually operate better when they have scarce resources.
Other questions, comments? Anybody out there have any good ideas about innovations that are going to be the internet equivalent or semiconductor equivalent for the ongoing recovery?
Just a quick comment. Really exciting to me to hear about immigration reform being important for people studying technology. And you're right, Greenspan just recently commented how we must keep the top level and we must keep the bottom level of the immigrants here, both those with PhDs and those also working in our restaurants, et cetera. But I guess the challenge to you is how do we find the technology, maybe related to remittances, related to ESL, related to financial education, I mean, all kinds of aspects to make sure that those wonderful people are helping us get out of our economic mess.
Well, there is another method, which we have not heard from the government for a while, which is the bilateral investment treaty. And you know, sometimes I think if we can't attract those people to come here or encourage them to stay here, maybe we could invest in whatever venture they started over wherever they're going to be. And now that will require, again, a government. I hate to just keep putting government back into the picture, but that would require the government allowing, you know, some of the Chinese company to invest in Palm or something, and or Freecom of their sort, because and then we have a reversal rights or reciprocal rights to do the same thing. That's another method, which is we don't need them to physically be here, but we could actually benefit from their innovation and their hard work.
You know, we talked a little, we've spent a lot of time talking about the U.S. and the U.S. recovery, but you know, there seems to be some evidence that stimulus packages in other countries, or working packages is maybe the wrong word, sometimes it's just, you know, the government getting involved in promoting consumer spending. John and Bill, I think we both talked about the example of China, where, you know, the Chinese government is playing a very active role, and it's not only benefiting Chinese companies but American companies as well. What are you seeing around the world, John, that you know, goes to the point of, you know, what's happening internationally, and might the recovery start happening or the innovation start happening outside the U.S. first?
Well, China, I'll speak a little bit about China. I think that China is, you know, well, the way the government works is pretty direct. So they have the stimulus package that of a reasonable size of GDP, and they pumped into the economy relatively quickly for infrastructure. But there is a downside to that. I think the long-term effect, and I don't mean thousands of years long-term, I mean maybe 3 years on, 5 years effect, it needs to be examined a little bit, because I now know that they have invested, or they forced the bank to invest in things that may or may not actually have the right valuations. So when that stimulus package is over, that transition could be very difficult. I'm not an economist. I'm just saying that, just logically speaking. So, but it is true that overseas, especially markets that have strong internal consumption demand, it seems to doing reasonably well compared to us.
Got a question over here? Comment?
Hi, Rick Hutley. I'm the Vice President of Innovation at Cisco Systems. So back to your question about what is or what could help drive the economy for the US and around the world. One of the big things we're seeing is collaboration is a big issue now in the world, and that is one of the things that will help drive the economy. It's about getting people to be able to work together more efficiently than ever before. So growing the economy is great, but take the economy you have and make it more efficient. And a lot of that is born from the fact that we don't sit next to each other anymore. We've globalized and offshored and outsourced and everything else. We're mobile. And so the ability to work together productively has become harder over the past few years. And we need to use technology to allow us to work together more efficiently. And that also leads back to the innovation topic and recognition that innovation isn't something that happens inside our companies alone. It happens across the piece. We have to innovate with our customers, with our partners, even with our competition. And we have to do that on a global basis. So I agree with all the issues about immigration and can we keep the talent in the country, etc. But I think we also have to open up to the fact that talent is worldwide and we have to innovate on a global basis.
Bill, you wanted to respond?
Well, I would say I agree with you. And in answer to what you're looking for, what do we have right in front of us right now that might be the driver for growth and innovation? Well, the internet's not over. You said the internet was the 90s. I think if you just add one adjective in front of it, maybe ubiquitous internet, then you have something that's unbelievably powerful right in front of us. It's so insidious, we don't even realize what's happened to us in the last decade, that the internet is on our body all day long for pretty much everybody. I mean, certainly everybody in this room, but many, many people in the world. And that can lead to this collaboration, and it's leading to new kinds of applications, and Twitter is one of the most amazing collaboration applications of all time. And that's only possible because of this ubiquity. So I think there are going to be many more valuable monetization opportunities based on that ubiquitous internet, mobile ubiquitous internet, and also productivity applications based on that. And we have only seen the tip of the iceberg. Yeah. So I think there's a lot there.
Just to throw in a fact on that, I agree also that collaboration is a huge untapped field. The average worker who does transactional work, so these are things that are rules-based and automatable, right now has 2.5 times the IT capital stock that a worker who does what you could call interactive work or a tacit interactions work, which is not rules-based, involves collaboration, judgment, tacit knowledge of how an organization works. So there's a huge upside just to get that class of workers, which really needs to collaborate, up to the average level of IT spend. That alone is a huge benefit for IT providers, setting aside the spillover effect of the economy of that effectiveness.
We have time for just one more question. I'm going to take one from Spot Me, and it's from Eric Wooten, who asks, do you believe that China is now more pro-business than America? I'll let each of the panelists
I think so.
Unfortunately,
yes? I think so, yes.
Brad?
I'm not an expert. Probably yes, and it's probably not necessarily an unmitigated good.
Let's say they're more focused.
Fair enough. Gentlemen, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.